as well as paramyxoviruses. And other paramyxoviruses will be focusing on parainfluenza and RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. So the first part of this lecture will primarily be focusing on adenoviruses. So how many of you have heard of adenoviruses, and which adenoviruses have you heard of? How many of you have heard about adenoviruses? Give me examples of adenoviruses that you know. Yes. What do you know about them? Yeah. Yeah. I don't have the sorry, let me get to my glass. So I'm seeing responses here. I was muted a little bit, sorry for that. So I can see from the chart here that you guys had done paramyxoviridae with Dr. Masika. We are done with paramyxo. So the family paramyxoviridae has many viruses. I'm not sure whether Masika covered all of them. I think he had shared with me to cover parainfluenza and RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. Did you cover that as well?
We didn't cover RSV.
Pardon?
We didn't cover RSV.
How about parainfluenza?
Yeah, we covered influenza, parainfluenza.
You see that there's influenza and then there's parainfluenza. Those are different viruses.
Oh, sorry, no, we covered influenza, not parainfluenza.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so then today I just want to focus on adenoviruses, and if we get time, we can look at the RSV and the parainfluenza. If not, we can, have a follow-up lecture on that. And so let's talk about adenoviruses. What did you say? Did I see you guys saying that you have heard about adenoviruses? No. Everyone is no. Yeah, so good. Or some people say they have had. So no, nobody has heard about adenoviruses. Okay, so that's good. So let's talk about this group of viruses today, and we shall be looking at the introduction of these viruses, look at the epidemiology of adenoviruses. We shall also look at, the transmission, clinical presentation, laboratory diagnosis, prevention, and, treatment and prevention. I think that's what we are going to do in the next, few minutes. I'm in class. So as a way of introduction, adenoviruses are a group of viruses. We're going to look at their virology in the next slide. But this is a group of viruses that actually cause a number of diseases in human beings. They cause diseases ranging from respiratory diseases, gastrointestinal diseases, urinary diseases, eye diseases, and quite a number of diseases in human beings. Although, if you think about diseases caused by adenoviruses, we are told that majority of them are subclinical. Subclinical meaning that these viruses, when you get infected with them, you don't really get to a symptom stage. So you get the infection, your body produces immunity, and the immunity is able to clear the virus without you knowing. So a number of people get infected with adenoviruses, but they rarely cause disease in humans. It's a good thing for us. However, they also have a certain characteristic which we have talked about before in herpes viruses. These viruses actually have the ability to persist after infection. They can persist. You get infected, and even though you may never have developed symptoms, you could be carrying these viruses for months. And during this time, you can actually transmit these viruses to other people. So it's good to cause subclinical diseases, clinical outcome, but a lot of people become carriers of these viruses that can then spread them to other people. So there are about 57 serotypes of adenoviruses, but only 1/3 of these serotypes are responsible for human disease. So adenoviruses infect, a number of other animals other than humans, from frogs to insects to birds, So these infections are based on the serotypes that are susceptible to these animals. So for human beings, only 1/3 of the 57 of the known adenoviruses are responsible for human disease. So other than the disease that they cause in human beings, these viruses have the ability to cause cancer in other animals, but in human beings, they're not necessarily known to cause cancer. They cause other diseases that we have mentioned earlier. Finally, under the introduction, one of the greatest advantages of adenoviruses is that they can be used as vectors for gene therapy. They can be used as a vector as gene therapy. What this means is that, if there's a disease, that, for you to treat it, all you need is to get, for example, if you have a viral disease, I'm just using, say, COVID as an example, not necessarily that's a good example. So if you have a disease like COVID disease caused by coronavirus, we know that only part of the coronavirus is needed to mount immunity to protect you from subsequent infections with the coronavirus. Then what happens is that one will take the genes of that particular protein from COVID virus and put it into adenovirus, right? And once it is put into adenovirus genome, then you are exposed to adenovirus, which is not, pathogenic to humans, or which has been modified not to cause disease in humans. And once this adenovirus is in your body, it is able to replicate and produce proteins related to COVID-19 that your body will now see and respond and produce antibodies and cellular immunity to fight COVID-19, should you be exposed to one. So the adenoviruses have been used as vectors for gene therapy, and that is an advantage of these viruses to human beings. So let's look a little bit further at these viruses. So these viruses, adenoviruses, are DNA viruses. They were first isolated, from children, from the tonsils and adenoid glands of children who had had, protracted respiratory disease and swollen glands. And so way back in 1953, tissues were taken from, these kids who had swollen lymph nodes and adenoid, and was cultured in the lab. And they discovered that there's a new virus which was causing the pathology of the tonsils and the adenoid glands. And for that reason, it was named as adenovirus, just from the fact that the first case of adenovirus was isolated from adenoid glands of a sick kid. So the family consists of double-stranded DNA, just like other DNA viruses. And these viruses have been known to infect, different animals, including birds. The viruses can be found in the respiratory tract. And as we said earlier, persistence is one of the characteristics of adenovirus. They also cause disease in veterinary, but that's not of our interest today. So they cause disease in a number of, animals, including veterinary animals as well. So epidemiology of adenoviruses, these viruses are found everywhere, wherever you go globally, they are there. In some countries, you'll find people suffering from adenoviruses throughout the year. In other countries, there are usually the number of cases would rise during, say, winter or during cold seasons. But the most common serotypes that are associated with infections, especially respiratory types, are adenovirus 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7. So these are the ones that are associated with respiratory diseases in humans. Adenovirus, I think you remember, we talked about adenovirus 40 and 41 are transmitted through fecal-oral, and they cause gastroenteritis, the vomiting and diarrhea in infants, mainly in infants. So we've talked about the fact that most of these diseases are, subclinical, but it's very interesting on how, people acquire different adenoviruses as you grow. For example, we know that adenovirus 1, 2, 5, and 6, people normally acquire them during the first few years of life. And, remember, these are respiratory, diseases. Then types 3 and 7, people acquire them when they go to school, and then others such as 4, 8, and 9, people acquire them during the adulthood. So different groups of adenoviruses are acquired at different times. This is purely because of the fact that they cause different diseases, and depending on which stage you are in life, your susceptibility to any of these serotypes of adenoviruses will be based on the age at which you are in your life. So in terms of classification of adenoviruses, so there are two things about the classification of adenoviruses. One is that these viruses have been classified into two genera based on genetic criteria. So we have adenovirus and pseudoadenovirus, two genera, but these genera are not usually used in the classification of adenovirus. Instead, adenovirus have been further classified differently into three genera, and these genera are based on the host that they infect. So we have like avian adenovirus, then we have adenovirus, and then we have master adenovirus. So these are the three genera of adenovirus that are commonly used, although some people prefer to use the adenovirus and pseudoadenovirus as genera. It doesn't matter as long as you understand where you're coming from. But so out of this genera, master adenovirus, which include a number of adenoviruses, that infect different, animals, mammals rather, such as cows, sheep, deer, pigs, dogs, and also all the human adenoviruses are actually clustered into the genera of master adenovirus. So I hope you remember that. In humans, as I said earlier, there are 57 adenoviruses known, of which are divided into seven groups, A to G. But remember, as I said earlier, out of these 57, only a third of them are associated with the human disease. Others are not, they can infect humans, but they are not associated with human disease. And we're going to look at, those adenoviruses that are associated with human disease among the 57 serotypes of adenovirus. So in terms of transmission, so the source of infection usually is someone who is sick, someone who has acute stage of disease, or someone who has been sick and just recovered, or someone who is actually not showing signs or symptoms of adenovirus. So that is how you can actually acquire this virus from a carrier. You can acquire adenovirus from someone who is having acute disease. You can acquire it from someone who has had acute disease but has recovered. But as we are going to see, there are many diseases caused by adenoviruses, and the mode of transmission are different. So it will depend on which serotype of adenovirus you are acquiring and disease that is going to cause in you. And so the viruses are usually secreted in the nasopharyngeal secretions. Then sputum, when you cough, sneeze, they can also secreted in through the eye, the tears of the eye, through feces, as well as through urine. People who are immunocompromised, they produce large quantities of adenovirus, and sometimes you can even find adenovirus in the urine of those who are immunocompromised. Immunocompromise can come as a result of diseases like HIV/AIDS, but you can also, become immunocompromised because you have undergone organ transplant and you are being treated with immunosuppressive drugs. So such individuals can easily pass the adenoviruses in urine. So adenovirus have also been shown to be, it will be transmitted through airborne. As I said earlier, when you sneeze, cough, you can also actually pass this virus to someone who is not infected. So if you look at all diseases caused by viruses, such as respiratory diseases, gastrointestinal diseases, eye diseases caused by viruses in general, adenovirus only contributes 5 to 10% of those diseases. So they don't usually contribute much of the diseases that we have talked about they can cause in humans. We talked about the fact that during the cold seasons, you may see the rise in the number of people who are presenting with adenoviruses. But again, as earlier I said in the epidemiology, that in certain countries, like in temperate, not temperate, tropical countries, adenoviruses are usually found, throughout the year. But they do have certain seasons where, we have more adenovirus, disease, which we call outbreaks or epidemics. In the temperate lands, epidemics are usually associated with during the cold seasons when people are mainly indoors. Yeah, so children who are less than 6 months of age, 5 years, are the ones who actually suffer most from adenovirus disease, as well as the military personnel. I don't understand why military personnel also suffer, but I know that for children, because they have weak immunity, they are usually susceptible to viral infections, and the outcome of infections are usually more severe than adults and grown-ups. So when you acquire adenovirus, the serotypes that we have mentioned previously, through the modes of transmission that we talked about in the previous slide, then what happens? Number one, adenoviruses are known to infect and replicate in the epithelial cells of the respiratory tract, the eye, the gastrointestinal tract, and the urinary tract. So these viruses are very good in replicating in a number of cells covering certain organs of your body. So if they have access to the respiratory tract, they will replicate on the fetal cells that are lining the respiratory tract. If they have access to the eye, they will also replicate in the fetal cells that are covering the eye. If they have access to gastrointestinal tract, the stomach, the small and the large intestine, they also replicate in those organs, as well as if they have a chance to access the urinary tract, they will still replicate in these epithelial cells. Interestingly, when they reach these organs, they will replicate, but they rarely, move beyond that initial site of infection. So they normally cause what is called localized infection. Sometimes in certain serotypes of adenoviruses have been known to move into the lymph node, access, the blood system, in the central nervous system, but that's not a common thing that occurs with adenoviruses. Most of them do infect the local area where they land, replicate there, they cause pathology, and that is it. So with exceptions, serotypes 40 and 41, most of the adenoviruses, they actually do not cause, especially the ones that are causing gastrointestinal disease, rather than the ones that have access to the gastrointestinal tract. Most of them do not cause gastrointestinal disease, except adeno 40 and 41. These are the ones that cause diarrhea. But it's important to note that other adenoviruses, which you can acquire through ingestion, can actually also end up in the stomach. They may replicate there, but they may not cause the pathology of the stomach. So once you get infected with adenovirus, again, as I said earlier, children are actually the ones who suffer adenovirus disease, severe disease, more than adults. Adults are usually, if they get infected, the disease is very mild because over the years they have been exposed to adenovirus infections and they have developed antibodies against these adenoviruses. And I said earlier, most adenoviruses, the infection, the disease is mild and self-limiting. So mild, it means that most people don't develop symptoms. Even if they develop symptoms, it may not be severe, but then you can actually recover without necessarily getting treatment. And so I want us to look at some of the diseases that are caused by adenoviruses. Number one, let's look at respiratory diseases caused by adenoviruses. The first is the inflammation of the pharynges, which is called pharyngitis. So adenoviruses, you would usually, in addition to bacterial pharyngitis, adenoviruses are the other cause of pharyngitis in children and adults, with children suffering more severe disease than adults. Adenovirus 3 and 7 have also been associated with pneumonia. We also have acute respiratory disease that presents with fever, running nose, cough, sore throat, has also been associated with adenoviruses. Adenoviruses have also been associated with pharyngoconjunctival fever. This is a fever that is, you are shedding tears and running nose, and accompanied with fever, red eyes, sore throat. This kind of respiratory disease is also been associated with adenovirus. I'm going to show you a table with the different serotypes of adenoviruses that are associated with these respiratory diseases. So you can see that most respiratory diseases actually they're associated with adenovirus, ranging from pharyngitis, pneumonia, acute respiratory disease, and also pharyngoconjunctival respiratory disease, which presents with fever, red eyes, sore throat, in those who are suffering from this adenovirus disease. So that's one disease that is caused by adenoviruses. The other disease that is caused by adenoviruses are eye disease. Adenoviruses can cause eye disease. Remember, I said earlier that if the virus can get into contact with your eye, then you can actually, the virus can replicate in the epithelial cells surrounding the eye, and then you get sick. So so that's one of the diseases that can be caused by adenoviruses. And then the third disease is the one that's associated with gastrointestinal disease. And I think we've talked about this when we're talking about viral gastroenteritis, where we talked about adenovirus 40 and 41. Now, these are the diseases that I've mentioned, but there are also other diseases caused by adenoviruses. So I want you to go and read about other diseases caused by adenoviruses. What I've shared with you are just three major diseases, but adenoviruses can also cause other diseases. So this table here now summarizes the serotypes of adenoviruses that are associated with different clinical outcomes or diseases. So number one, we talked about acute respiratory disease, and showing here that the adenoviruses that are associated with this are adenovirus 1, adenovirus 7, adenovirus 14, and adenovirus 21. The other disease, pneumonia, viral pneumonia, can also be caused by adenovirus 1, 3, 4, 7, and 55. So I want to take note that adenovirus 7 and 1, both of them can cause either acute respiratory disease as well as viral pneumonia. Conjunctivitis, which is the disease caused to the eye, can be caused by adenovirus 3, 7, 8, 10, 14, 19, and 37. So again, adenovirus 7 is still appearing here as a common cause of these different diseases. Gastrointestinal disease is mainly caused by adenovirus 40 and 41. Adenovirus 9, 11, and 31 would go and replicate in the stomach, the small and the large intestine, but they cause mild, gastrointestinal. They don't cause a severe disease as adenovirus 40 and 41. So please note that. And then we also have adenovirus being able to access the central nervous system. As I said earlier, that although adenovirus would ordinarily replicate at the point of entry and cause what is called localized infection, adenovirus, some of them have ability to move to the lymph node, get into the bloodstream, get into the central nervous system, and once in the nervous system, they can cause inflammation of the meninges of the brain, leading to meningitis or encephalitis. And we are told that adenovirus 2, 6, 7, 12, and 32 are the ones that are associated with adenovirus meningoencephalitis. So it is important for you to remember this. Again, from a clinical point of view, as someone who is preparing to be a medical doctor, you will be coming across patients with different diseases. One of the culprits that could be causing this disease, whether it is a respiratory disease, pneumonia, conjunctivitis, gastrointestinal, meningoencephalitis, it could be due to adenovirus. So it's important for you to remember this table. So once somebody has been infected, again, if I go back here, you remember we talked, if I pick gastroenteritis, viral gastroenteritis, if before today I ask you which one would you suspect to be, if a child comes to you with symptoms that suggest that the child is suffering from viral gastroenteritis, you would not think of adenovirus as the first culprit. We'll think of rotavirus, and other viruses as well. And so a disease like gastroenteritis is caused by other viruses, but we are told here that even adenoviruses also cause gastroenteritis. The same with meningoencephalitis. So if you go back and remember about polio causes meningoencephalitis. And there are also other viruses that cause respiratory diseases like one of the RSV that we'll be talking about later at some point. So these diseases that we're listing here, all of them are viral diseases. Some of them could also be caused by bacteria. So clinical diagnosis is never enough to confirm that if a child is presenting with gastroenteritis, then it means it's either rota or it is adenovirus. The most definitive confirmatory way of knowing what the child is suffering from or whoever is sick suffering from is to carry out laboratory diagnosis. And so to perform laboratory diagnosis, you need to collect the right specimen, which is taken to the laboratory for diagnosis. And some of the specimen we use for diagnosing adenoviruses include throat swabs, nasopharyngeal aspirates, conjunctival aspirate, conjunctival swab, urine, stool, blood, and body fluids. Remember, we talked about, so adenoviruses, can be found in the respiratory tract. They can be found in the gastrointestinal tract. They can be found in the urinary tract, and they can be found in the eye, And so all these are, sources of specimen, but this will depend with which disease are you dealing with. Are you dealing with gastrointestinal disease? Are you dealing with respiratory disease? Or are you dealing with, which other disease being caused by a particular adenovirus? So you collect the sample, send it to the lab. In the lab, there are a bunch of options for tests. But if you look onto my slide, we have tests in black. For example, microscopy, electron microscopy is one of the tests. It used to be common long time ago, but it is no longer a common test for the adenoviruses. Basically, electron microscopy would show you the shape of a virus, and is able to tell you that these viruses belong to this family of viruses. The lowest one test, which is the viral culture, also used to be a common test, but it's no longer used because it takes so long. It takes up to 2 weeks to be able to get back the results. And so the most commonly used test now for adenovirus, disease or infection are what we call antigen detection using a test called ELISA. You can also test for antibodies, again, using ELISA. You can also do what is called molecular test. Now, so the antigen detection, ELISA stands for enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, so that you can detect antigen for adenovirus. Then there's another test which can detect antigen called DFA, direct fluorescent antigen test, direct fluorescent antigen test. Those tests the two tests can be used to detect the antigen. Antigens are part of adenovirus that has been left behind during the replication. But you can also use ELISA to test for antibodies, and mainly people look for IgM ELISA to detect for the recent infection due to adenovirus infection. Molecular technique like PCR have become so common. They are very sensitive, they are rapid, you can get results within a short time. And now people use them more than both serology and antigen tests. So what time did we say we take a break from 4?
Yeah.
So it's 2 minutes to 4. So we can take a break from that for our colleagues, Muslim brothers and sisters, to pray for us, and then we join in 15 minutes. Is that correct, Kelsey?
Yes, please, 15 minutes.
All right. So I take a pause there, and then we link up in 15 minutes. So for the Muslim brothers and sisters, please, as you pray, remember us in your prayers. So talk to you in 15 minutes. Thank you. Before we took a break, we were here under the diagnosis of adenovirus disease, and we looked at the specimen of choice, the type of tests that are available, the ones which are currently recommended, and again, so after clinical presentation and laboratory diagnosis, you should be able to confirm if one is actually suffering from any of the adenoviruses that we talked about today. So after diagnosis, usually there's the next step for a doctor is treatment. But we don't have any antiviral drug that has been recommended for treatment of adenovirus diseases, although some drugs have been used, some drugs used to treat herpes viruses have been used to treat adenovirus disease, but there's no particular drug that is being made, that is been licensed, that can target and clear adenoviruses. So I hope that's very clear. Adenoviruses don't also respond to interferon. Interferons are chemicals produced by your body to fight viral diseases. That is why some people, when they get infected with the viral viral agent, their body is able to clear the virus without necessarily them developing symptoms because of the fact that your body produces interferon. But adenoviruses never respond to interferon. So there's most of the conditions due to adenoviruses are, as I said earlier, are self-limiting. Unless you are immunocompromised or you are very young, in which case the disease may be severe, and chances there is also potential of dying if you are an infant or heavily immunocompromised, for that matter. But any other person is unlikely to die because of adenovirus disease. So I hope that is clear. So in the absence of treatment, then we can talk about prevention. So how do we protect ourselves from getting infected with adenoviruses? To understand what we need to do about prevention, we also need to understand how is adenoviruses transmitted. As we conclude this lecture, I want to hear from you. What are the things that come in your mind when it comes to prevention of transmission of adenoviruses? What do we do to protect you from acquiring adenoviruses? Number one, can you see the slide?
Yeah, you're on slide 12.
But someone is saying I can't see slide 13.
Yes.
Oh, so. No. I'm on slide 12 intentionally. It's by intention. So I wanted to see what are the things that you need to do to protect yourself from getting adenovirus infection. So does someone is asking about HIV? Does HIV respond to interferon? No. Hand washing is one of the methods that can protect you from adenovirus, given that adenovirus is transmitted through fecal oral. That is number one. Sanitation, proper sanitation is good. That's okay. Proper sanitation. What else? Are interferons specific to viruses or even bacteria? No. Interferons are not specific to viruses. They target all sorts of viruses. But as we have learned from today's lecture, adenoviruses are not sensitive to interferon. There are a number of viruses which are not sensitive to interferon, including HIV. Proper hygiene, so good. I think that is how far you can think in terms of prevention of transmission of adenoviruses. Avoid touching the eyes. That's very important because you can transmit the virus to the eyes through touch. Frequent cleaning equipment and instrument, that's also important. AKA, wherever you are, your full names, that's good enough. Chlorination, that's very good. Kamunya Maktrimi, I hope that's your true name. Chlorination of swimming pool is also very important. People can actually, pass adenovirus either through coughing, sneezing when they are swimming, or through mucus when they are swimming. Then you get into a swimming pool, and as you swim with your eyes open, the virus gets into your eyes. So chlorination of swimming pool is very, very important. So let's look at what is it that we need to do to protect ourselves from acquiring adenoviruses. On this slide, I think some of them you have mentioned. Careful hand washing is the easiest way to prevent adenovirus infections. Washing hands completely, avoid transmitting adenovirus from you to another person. Disinfecting the surfaces. So when people sneeze, cough, the droplets end up in the surfaces, and when you touch the surfaces, put on your mouth, your eye, you end up acquiring adenovirus. So make sure that surfaces are disinfected using jig or sodium hypochlorite. In group setting, paper towels may be advisable other than using towels. People like using towels for cleaning themselves. And when you, for example, you go to a swimming pool and you have adenovirus, you're sneezing, and you at the end of swimming, you use that towel to clean your nose, and somebody else who's going to use who is going to clean the towel will handle the towel using their hands, and they get infected. So there is the other issue is around water, waterborne outbreak, as I talked about chlorination, as one of the ways of preventing transmission of adenoviruses that cause conjunctivitis. Also, you guys will be examining the eyes of patients, so please make sure that you exercise strict aseptic techniques when you are examining somebody's eye. Otherwise, the equipment that you're using to examine the eye could carry adenovirus from one person to another. So ensure that that equipment is sterilized. Don't use it between one person to another before sterilization. Finally, there is a vaccine for adenoviruses, and this vaccine is targeting adenovirus 4 and 7, and is an oral, live-genetic viral vaccine, which currently is recommended for people in the military. The people in the military are at the high risk of getting adenovirus, disease because of the way they live. They live in crowded places, usually stressed, and the immunities are usually down, and therefore the vaccine is recommended for people in the military. So there's a vaccine for adenovirus, and this vaccine can protect you or can reduce the risk of one getting severe disease due to adenoviruses. Colleagues, allow me to end this lecture here. We were supposed to cover paramyxo, viruses, 2 of them parainfluenza or RSV. But I want to request, do I send you notes for this, or we look for a makeup lecture for these 2 viruses? I'll only touch one. So which one will you, notes or makeup lecture? Now I'm seeing 50-50, some notes, some makeup lecture, some notes. So now which one do we go for? Okay, I think you will instruct me through your class rep what we need to do, and then we shall look for either one of the mornings. This will take less than 1 hour to cover the 2 viruses, and then, someone is asking for both the notes and makeup class. That is a handful, my friends. I can do that, but I think the best would be to have a makeup class. I will, with class rep, please check for me a time next week to have a makeup class, then I can share with you the notes. It's always interesting to interact with you through class before I leave you to read on your own. Otherwise, asanteni sana. How does chlorine affect adenovirus? Yet, it is a non-envelope, meaning that it is highly resistant to such agents. Certain concentration of chlorine do actually neutralize adenoviruses. So certain concentration of chlorines, like the one they use in swimming pool, would actually neutralize adenoviruses. Okay, so if there is no any other question, so someone is saying, help us with the slides. Tafadhali, this lecture is recorded and you can always go back and replay and watch this many, many times. Class rep, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So instead of sharing you the slides were presented, and you can, I think it's easy for you to, if you want to listen to the talk and see the slides, then I can see Bukayo is crying. Henry Madaka is also crying. What's happening? Guys, bundles ya good. Ninyi umesota, si ndio? Students umesota kabisa, hakuna pesa. I thought university gives students iPhone. University gives students bundles. Poverty, Bill Clinton, Jefferson. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I'll make a point next week after we're done with my lecture to share the slides with the class rep, plus the notes there's a lecture that I promised to give you notes. Okay. So asante sana. Have a good afternoon. Have enjoyed the weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.